Hey guys, welcome back. If this is your first time here, my name's Anita and this is the place to be for non-native English speakers who want to stay inspired and confident. So in my previous video, I talked about my experience as an international student when I first migrated to Australia, and I received some really lovely comments from some of you guys about how my story really inspired you, which was just so wonderful to hear. To be honest, I was a little bit apprehensive about sharing my stories publicly because I was a bit worried if I'd be perceived differently. But then I came to the realization that, you know what? Yeah, I'm not like my other colleagues who are native speakers. They were born into the language and I had to learn the language firsthand. That's just circumstances. If anything, I should be proud of how I successfully transitioned from an international student to now an Australian English teacher. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to hide. I have 13 years worth of stories to share, and I can have all these stories and not share them with anyone, but then I won't be serving anyone any good if deep down I know what I have to say will benefit at least one person out there. So this video will be divided into two parts: how I became fluent fast the first 3 to 4 years since my move to Australia, and how I became an English teacher in Australia in the recent years. To be honest, there were so many techniques that I used the first couple of years when I was developing fluency in English. I've talked about a lot of these techniques in my other videos, so I'll provide links to those videos in the description below. I'd highly recommend you check out those videos when you finish watching this one. There were heaps of things that I did, but I wanted to share 3 things that contributed to my success the most. So let's get started with the first tip. Number 1, full immersion. So what does this mean? I wrote down the definition. Such a nerd. Full immersion in language learning is the situation where the learner spends time in an environment operating solely in the target language. Basically, it means you think, speak, write, and receive information in English only. You do everything in English. It's kind of like you go to settings on your phone and then you change the default language to English. It sounds super hardcore, doesn't it? But I'm a big fan of this method and know from my personal experience how effective it is. When I first came to Australia 13 years ago, so during my uni days, I used English to English dictionaries only, took notes in English, did my research in English. I tried my best to put myself in an environment where I could have as much social interactions in English as possible. And in my daily life, I watched English TV shows and movies only, listened to English podcasts. The podcasts exist at that time, a decade ago, but you get my point. And when I went to the post office and when I needed to see a doctor, I'd have a local Australian help me instead of getting someone who speaks my first language. And when I journal in English as well. It's just such a great way to train yourself to think in English. People often ask me if it was difficult in the beginning, and yes, of course, I had moments where I was frustrated with myself that I couldn't express myself as well as I'd like. But the truth was, I was so consumed with the joy of learning new words and phrases every day. Those moments where I felt down were very fleeting. I guess you just learn to not let those moments get you down. I didn't really set time aside every day to learn English because I guess I just feel like that's very artificial and forced. I simply saw it as a lifestyle, and I still do. And the language is fully integrated into my life. In my opinion, that's the best and fastest way to learn, to become fluent. You don't live like 2 separate lives. You don't live in 2 separate bubbles where, for example, you only use English in class or 2 hours a day when you learn vocabulary and grammar. You use and live the language. Yeah, so That's it. You live the language. I know I make it sound like the tip is more for people who are already living in an English-speaking country, but the truth is you can use immersion without ever leaving your home country. You can start by changing the default language on your phone to English, and you make a commitment to, for example, watch news and movies in English only. Of course, there's more you can do. Maybe I'll make a video about this another time. Alright, tip number 2, see yourself as a native speaker. Well, at least a competent speaker. I know what you're thinking. How can I possibly see myself as a native English speaker when I'm obviously not? I know, I hear you. But here's the thing. Have you ever thought about how your belief that you're not fluent is actually holding you back? Well, this is how our minds work. The more we believe we're not fluent, we don't sound like native speakers, we make silly mistakes, the more we will go and seek and see evidence of us not being good enough as a non-native English speaker in our reality. Because our brains tend to reinforce what we already believe. So if that's what you believe about yourself, you will then see evidence that reinforces that belief, such as people not understand what you say, words not coming to you when you're having a conversation. So you become so fixated, so focused on the evidence of failure, which then leads you to feel frustrated, defeated, and small and not good enough. And when that's how you feel about yourself, it only further cements the belief that you're not fluent yet. And you now feel like mastering the language is such a daunting task. As a result, you are now less likely to stay motivated to immerse yourself in the language because you don't have the confidence to do it, which then results in less learning opportunities for yourself, and hence you're not improving as fast as other people who are more confident. So just remember this, what we think creates feelings, emotions, and our emotions, how we feel inside, then dictates our behavior, and the way we act then produces a result. Nothing exists in our world that does not first exist in our mind. In order to achieve any dreams or goals we have, we must first make a change at the level of belief. So just imagine this. What if you start seeing English as your first language and your mother tongue as your second language? How would that make you feel? How would that make you act differently? Take myself as an example. From very early on, I made the decision to think in English at least 90% of the time, and I saw myself as someone who was already fluent and that English was my default language. So I trained my mind to think, since it's my first language, then it's not really something I have to deliberately learn. And because that's my belief system that I had within myself, so I wasn't too stressed about learning English. Instead, I felt confident, excited when I was doing everything in English. It just felt so natural to go about my day in English. Of course, I didn't feel that way 100% of the time. There were times where I was being really hard on myself, especially when my perfectionistic tendencies kicked in. And there were times where I still had to rely on my first language. But over the years, with repetition and dedication, I've become better and better at seeing myself as a bilingual. And now I don't doubt it. I don't even doubt it anymore. It's part of my identity. And then I see both English and Chinese as my first languages. Okay, tip number 3, repetition. Repetition is the key to learning, let me tell you. You can't expect yourself to change your learning habits overnight, to get good at something after your first attempt, to expect new words and phrases to stick in your mind after coming across them for the first time. It's highly, highly unlikely that it will happen. It takes 21 days to build a habit, and you need frequent exposure to a word or a phrase for this to become a part of your active vocabulary. At least 2 or 3 times for your brain to keep it long term. So be patient with yourself. If you keep putting in the work, doing all the little techniques that I've talked about in other videos with the right mindset that I mentioned in this video, then trust me when I say that you will see the results before you know it. Okay, I think that's all I have got for today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video and you find the tips helpful. Don't forget to give this video a like and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in part 2. Okay, ciao, bye.